I always thought the apocalypse would be different, quieter, perhaps, more elegant. Something like the end of the world with orange skies, cinematic thunder, and an epic soundtrack. But no, what I experienced that night was noisy, sticky, windy, and above all, full of insanity. And all because of a woman who decided to turn my storm shelter into a makeshift spa during a Category 4 hurricane. You may think I'm exaggerating, but wait until you understand the context. The hurricane warning came in advance. Everyone knew it was going to be tense. Those gusts of wind that tear off roofs like paper from presents. And, of course, as a prepared and somewhat paranoid resident, I have a shelter in my backyard. An underground shelter, reinforced, stocked with groceries, drinking water, emergency light, radio, and beer. Lots of beer. Basic survival stuff, you know? Except that this shelter also serves as the meeting point for my hunting club. This means that, as well as supplies, it has a reclining sofa, a projector for bad 80s horror movies, some stuffed deer heads, themed decoration, please don't judge, and a freezer full of game meat. That very rootsy stuff that annoys every neighbor who believes that tofu is morally superior to picanha. Speaking of neighbors, this is where the real hurricane of the story comes in. This woman had moved in less than 6 months before, and in 6 months, she had already managed to annoy enough people to form a soccer team. The lady in House 18, who had her Halloween decorations censored. The couple in House 7, who were reported because their dog barked too aggressively. And I, of course, was the final prize in her hate lottery, because I have a basement with hunting guns and beer, or, as she calls it, a toxic male oppression center. So far, so good. I've learned to ignore it. But, on the day of the hurricane, when the siren went off and everyone locked themselves in their homes or ran to the community shelter, she decided she was going to do something different. She decided to invade. That's what you read. The door to my shelter has a password. The password was never shared with anyone outside the hunting club, but apparently, her son saw us coming in once, and she, who is as discreet as an air raid siren, used that loophole to get in. Can you imagine? We're downstairs, calmly watching a bad Van Damme movie, the wind screaming outside, cold beer in hand, and PLIM, the door opens. Here comes a drenched woman in a ridiculous bathing cap and velvet bathrobe, shouting, "Finally a decent environment in this neighborhood." I swear to God, I thought I was having a stroke. She walked in as if she owned the place. She started looking around with that frustrated decorator look, wrinkling her nose at the stuffed heads and saying that the space had potential. Potential. In the middle of a hurricane, with roof tiles flying off and trees shattering, the creature was analyzing the design of the shelter as if it were in an episode of Brothers at Work. I still tried to stay calm. I thought, well, the world is ending out there. Maybe she just needs a safe place. But the woman had the audacity to demand that we turn off the movie because violent male shouting disrupts the relaxing atmosphere. And then she asked for a hot towel. A hot towel. Can someone explain to me at what point in human history civilization evolved to the point of demanding hot towels in storm shelters? Because, frankly, I missed that part of the survival manual. Meanwhile, the other members of the club were looking at me as if I'd invited her. Me? For God's sake, I'm the guy who won't even let an Uber on the sidewalk, let alone access the shelter. But she'd already settled in, opened a bottle of wine, which she'd brought in her handbag, by the way, and started doing yoga on the mat. Yes, yoga. In the middle of a shelter, with 4 guys stinking of leather and bacon, she was there, stretching her body in snake position, saying that the environment needed more yin energy. The woman was a hurricane, more destructive than the hurricane. And look, that was just the beginning. Because what we didn't know at the time was that she had called more people. Yes, she sent a location to 3 friends from her transcendental meditation group and invited them to a safe space with a welcoming atmosphere. When they arrived, soaking wet, and with suitcases on wheels, I realized that the night was going to be longer than any tropical storm. And that was just the beginning of hell. Her 3 friends arrived soaking wet, with those wheelie suitcases that rattle on the concrete floor of the shelter as if they were entering a resort with an all-inclusive package. The clothes, of course, weren't emergency ones. One of them was wearing a white silk blouse, in the middle of a hurricane, mind you. Another had one of those rose quartz tiaras, swearing that it warded off scarcity energies. And the third went straight to asking where she could slow down the chakras. I didn't even have time to ask what the hell that meant, because the room soon turned into a Pinterest conference version of the end of the world. While the wind outside sounded like a building collapsing, inside, it seemed as if the group had arranged a clandestine spiritual retreat. One pulled a lavender diffuser out of her backpack. Another started putting incense sticks on deer heads. There was one who opened a portable cooler with cut-up fruit and offered strawberries as if she were a Beverly Hills brunch hostess. The whole thing seemed like a badly written play, the kind that nobody believes until it happens to you. And the worst part wasn't even that. It was seeing the look on the faces of my friends at the club, who were already on their 3rd or 4th glass of beer, trying to understand how we'd gone from an anti-hurricane shelter with an 80s cabin vibe to a holistic space with ambient music. Yes, because the woman turned on the Bluetooth and put on a playlist called Sound of the Cosmic Womb. It was like the sound of depressed dolphins mixed with the sounds of Tibetan bowls and out-of-tune flutes. One of my friends, his patience wearing thin, looked at me and said, "If that woman hangs a hammock in here, I'll jump out in the middle of the hurricane." Really? I understood, but the owner of the show was in a state of ecstasy. She walked around the shelter as if she were showing a property on a reality TV show. She commented aloud on the possibilities of the space, the warmth of the raw concrete, and the rustic feel that could harmonize with earthy tones and hanging plants. When he saw the shelter's fridge, his eyes widened as if he had discovered oil. He wanted to know if we had alkaline water, if the meat was organic, and if he could use the microwave to heat up a detox soup. At that moment, I sat down. I took a deep breath, and I began to wonder at what point in life I had lost control of things. It was supposed to be a simple evening, in safety, fleeing from a hurricane that promised to tear even souls from the roofs. But no, I was trapped in an alternative episode of Let's Get Naked, vegan version. No naked people, but lots of incense. The mood really started to get heavy when she decided that the weapons room was a vibrational affront. She said this looking straight at the wall where our hunting tools are, ranging from ornate knives to legal and registered rifles. She said that just by being in there, her heart chakra was collapsing. She paused dramatically, put her hand to her chest, and let out a sigh that sounded more like something from a Mexican soap opera. Then he looked at me like he was about to issue a court order and said, "I'm going to need you to remove these low-frequency objects from the premises." My response was such an icy silence that even the generator seemed to cough nervously. I didn't remove anything. I didn't even answer. I was trying not to commit a crime. And, as if the situation wasn't already absurd enough, one of her friends brought a roll of contact paper printed with green leaves. She stuck it on the concrete walls of the shelter, saying that it would bring life to the environment. The next thing I knew, my bunker had turned into a cold-pressed juice store. Outside, the hurricane was roaring like a monster. Trees were falling, sirens were sounding, lightning was streaking the sky like flashes of war. And inside, one woman was stretching her legs, while another talked about ayahuasca and how it connects us with the roots of the earth and the suffering of whales. One of the club members asked quietly if there was an alternative way out just for him to escape. I didn't blame the guy. And what's worse, no one there seemed concerned about the fact that they were trespassing on private property during an emergency. The owner of the mess was absolutely convinced that she had a right to be there. She talked about community function, about how resources should be shared with empathy, and that our attitude was colonial and patriarchal, as if we were oppressors for being in our own shelter, without inviting the whole neighborhood to do a footbath. But the real problem was still brewing, and it wasn't outside. It was inside the shelter. Because when the space is small and tempers are as tight as rubber bands, one day someone loses the thread, and it wasn't who you think. At first, we tried to ignore it. You know that if we don't look, it might disappear tactic? Well, we tried that. We sat in silence, trying to listen to the news on the emergency radio, while the four creatures of the apocalypse were scattered around the shelter as if they had bought VIP tickets. But there's a limit to forced coexistence, especially when you're locked in a small space, surrounded by the sound of 1,000 km/h wind outside, and the smell of rosemary incense with pitanga inside. A smell that you can't get rid of, even if you pray hard. And that's when one of them, the oldest of the group, Reggie, lost his mind for good. Reggie is one of those guys who looks like he's come straight out of a camping equipment store. A lumberjack's beard, a voice like thunder, and a patience that only lasts until the second glass of whiskey. He'd been grumpy ever since his wife lit the second incense stick in the corner where he kept his hunting knives. When her friend put a yoga mat over the freezer where he kept the wild boar meat, he gave that humorless chuckle that is a sign that hell is officially open. Until the woman leading the circus decided that the shelter was too energetically dense, and suggested that everyone close their eyes to do a guided vibrational cleansing meditation. And that wasn't enough. She went to the generator and switched off the main light. In the middle of a hurricane, the darkness was instantaneous, accompanied by a sepulchral silence, the kind that lasts 3 seconds, but makes it seem as if the planet has stopped spinning. It was at that exact moment that Reggie stood up with that snap of the knees of people who have been carrying weight all their lives and let out a resounding, "That's it, that's it, that's it." And that was it. The atmosphere became really heavy. The four illustrious visitors froze, the leader holding the bag of crystals as if it were a protective shield against the demon. Reggie walked over to the generator panel, turned on the light the way an angry parent turns on a bedroom light to wake up a teenager, and turned around slowly, as if he were about to teach an epic moral lesson. Only he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring. The look in his eyes said it all. It was like, if one more air freshener is lit in here, I'm going to open the door and throw everyone to the wind. And I don't doubt that he would. It was the first time the woman seemed to understand that perhaps she had overreacted a little. But instead of apologizing, what did she do? She blamed the toxic masculinity of the environment. She said that Reggie was spreading aggressive testosterone around the shelter. That, of course, was enough for Reggie to let out another laugh, now more menacing. The woman sat down again, but not before straightening her robe as if she were a wronged queen. The atmosphere had become dense, yes, but it wasn't because of the spiritual energy. It was the sheer tension of people on the verge of exploding. The storm continued outside, fierce, looking like it was going to rip the trees out by the roots. The radio warned of flooding, roof collapses, and possible power outages. But none of that drew more attention than the silent ring inside that shelter. Meanwhile, the Zen playlist had been silenced, fortunately. But the four of them were sitting there, huffing and puffing, as if they were hotel guests, complaining about the room. One of them even had the nerve to ask if there was organic coffee, and another complained that the smell of frozen meat was an olfactory trigger. If someone told me that these phrases were said inside a shelter during a hurricane, I'd laugh. But sitting there in my own space, surrounded by stuffed deer heads, hunting weapons, a group of friends silent with rage, and four creatures who believed that the universe communicates through basal vibrations, I couldn't find it funny anymore. I silently wondered how far it would go. The hurricane could last 12 hours, and those women showed no signs of leaving. On the contrary, they seemed to be getting more and more comfortable. One had already spread out a blanket and lay down near the closet. Another was fiddling with her cell phone, posting stories with the caption, "Holistic Refuge in the Midst of Chaos," as if it were some kind of luxurious spiritual experience. And the main one, of course, started writing everything down in a little notebook. She said she was doing an anthropological study of American masculinity in survival spaces. It was then that I understood. It was no longer just an invasion. It was almost a documentary. And as Reggie wiped the blade of a knife with the cloth from the freezer and looked at the wall as if calculating whether he could make a hole with his bare hands, I realized that things weren't going to end well. Either someone would freak out, or someone would get hurt, and there were still hours to go before the hurricane let up. But the night still held a surprise, because the shelter, you see, has a secret compartment, one that only club members know about. It's hidden behind the supply closet and holds some relics from the group's past. Nothing much, just a trap door with extra chairs, old supplies, and photos. Photos of old meetings, hunts, barbecues, and a few other things that might seem, shall we say, controversial if they fell into the wrong hands. And that's exactly where the main invader decided to go poking around. She had been walking around the shelter for a long time, with that snobbish gait of someone who believes that everything is hers by divine right. Every detail was analyzed as if she were in a museum of horrors. She leaned against everything, made a disgusted face at the concrete wall, criticized the furniture as if she were a judge on Brothers to the Work, Apocalypse version, and what's worse, she began to comment loudly on the need to renovate the shelter for collective use by the community. It was in this momentum, at the height of her mania for the limelight, that she leaned against the supply cupboard, the cupboard you never touch, because behind it, hidden in an almost invisible entrance, is the club's extra compartment, a reserved space, locked away for years, with all those old things that nobody cares about anymore. At least, that's what we thought, until she accidentally pushed the cupboard and heard that dry sound of wood scraping against concrete. If there's one thing that arouses the curiosity of an insufferable person with free time, it's the sound of something secret being revealed. Her eyes lit up as if she had found the Holy Grail. She called one of her friends over, and together they began to pull on the furniture with a disproportionate amount of force for someone who can't lift a bucket of paint on a Saturday. The trapdoor lid appeared, that piece of floor with the rusty iron latch, and the smell of a bad story. I saw her eyes widen. She looked like a child who had found the stash of Christmas toys ahead of time, and it was exactly with this sick excitement that she opened the lid and climbed down the old wooden stairs. And then, my friend, the shack caught fire. Downstairs, she stumbled upon the hunting club's unedited past. Old photos pinned up on makeshift murals, trophies stacked in dusty boxes, newspaper clippings with exaggerated headlines like "Elk Hunters Win Regional Tournament with 400-pound Deer," crude trophies with misspelled names, a box of pirated DVDs of 90s horror movies, and, of course, the damn photo wall. The wall of shame. You know those old parties where no one had a filter, let alone any notion that one day the world would be dominated by social networks, instant moral judgment, and neurotic neighbors with time to spare. Those photos were exactly that. People in costumes, barbecues that looked like pagan rituals, betting games involving beer, game, and a rubber duck that no one could remember where it came from. And in one or two, someone, we won't name names, appears wearing a bear mask, holding a rifle, and wearing slippers. Nothing illegal, just deeply embarrassing. She left with an expression of pure delight, as if she had found enough material to destroy the reputations of half a street. It wasn't enough to break in. Now she wanted control. She said that those images were visual evidence of a violent, primitive, and sexist culture that needs to be fought. She even made a speech. Yes, she got up on the stool we used to reach the shelves and spoke for almost 5 minutes about Structural patriarchy in underground environments. One of my friends picked up a can of beans and started twirling it around in his hand with a worrying eagerness. The icing on the cake was when she threatened to divulge everything in the neighborhood group. The woman, even locked in a shelter in the middle of a hurricane, with no reliable cell phone signal, had the audacity to promise that the world would know. What's worse, she started taking photos with her cell phone, one by one, commenting loudly on every detail, as if she were in a museum of human scum. That's when Reggie, tired, sweaty, and smelling of built-up anger, raised his hand, as if at a school meeting, and let out the following sentence: "If you post any of this, I'm going to sue you until your yoga mat is seized." She laughed, a debauched laugh, the kind that only those who have never lost anything in their lives let out. She said he could try, but that she had friends in the HOA, on the city council, and even a cousin who had once been a lawyer. Her certainty was that of someone who lives in a bubble where everything always revolves around her. Only that bubble burst in a way she hadn't expected. The storm calmed down around 3 in the morning. The radio warned that the worst was over, but that it was still dangerous to go out. Even so, the woman decided that it was past time to leave this stinking dungeon. She organized her friends as if she were a tour guide on a vegan retreat, grabbed her cell phone, her bags, and marched to the stairs. But when she got to the door, she was surprised. It wouldn't open. It wasn't intentional. The wind from the hurricane had knocked down a tree on top of the structure, blocking the exit. Outside, there was nothing but rubble, broken wood, and a world falling apart. Inside, no one could move the door. And there, with her cell phone battery running out, in the dark, with no control, and trapped with the same people she despised, the woman felt for the first time that the universe might not revolve around her. She sat down, silently, no speech, no incense, for the first time, in silence. The next few hours were a mix of suspicious glances, forced yawns, and a tense silence that was only broken by the sound of the generator coughing. When the door was finally forced with a lever at dawn, and the natural lights came back on, she left without saying a word. Not a thank you, not even an excuse me, just a sour look, as if we had ruined her spiritual retreat. That morning, as the sun rose between the broken branches and debris, the shelter looked like it had survived 2 hurricanes, one meteorological, and the other an inflated ego. We laughed, then we cried, then we laughed again. And the rosemary incense? You can still smell it today. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.